Hey guys, Tucker Antell here with another Tucker's tutorial video. Today I wanted to talk about some exercises and scales and patterns to practice using the diminished scale. You can find sheet music for everything I'm going to talk about today on my website at tuckerantell.com. Click on the tutorial section and you'll also see other videos and sheet music there as well. So at the very top of the page I have the diminished scales written out. There is some confusion sometimes about the diminished scale. Which one to use, whole, half, half, whole, and so forth. And I always was frustrated by that when I was younger. And so what helped me a lot was to think about it like this. The half notes that I have written there on the page are the key centers or the diminished chord. So for instance, a diminished chord would be C, E flat, G flat or F sharp, and then A. And the thing that's really cool about a diminished scale or chord is that everything is completely symmetrical, meaning the distances between all the notes are exactly the same. They're all minor thirds. So if you're on a note and you want to create a diminished chord, all you have to do is create a minor third, then another minor third, then another minor third, and you've done it. Because of the symmetry of this chord and the scale, each one of the collection of notes or scale has four different starting places or four different names. So in other words, when you're practicing one scale, you're actually killing four birds with one stone. The most important thing, of course, is to actually think about which one you're doing while you're doing it so that you can get the most benefit from it. So, for instance, if you're doing a C, E flat, F sharp, A, if you started on F sharp and built it from there, you'd still have those four notes. It would just be F sharp in the bass. So that's why I have four different names for every one of those lines. The key centers, or the possible places you could build from, are the half notes, and the quarter notes are the passing tones. And that's sort of the way that I like to think about this scale. Rather than whole, half, whole, I think about it like there's the key centers that make the chord, and then there are the leading tones that lead up to them. Now a leading tone, of course, is in the major scale. It's the very last note before you get to the top. It's a half step, and it's a very powerful movement in music because a half step wants to slide up to its upper neighbor. And so that is very, there's a lot of force there, harmonic force there. So, for instance, C would be, the leading tone for C would be B, and then for the E flat, D, and then for the F sharp, F natural. The G flat would be F natural. So that's basically how it works, and when you think about it like that, I think it gets rid of all that confusion and mystery. The other thing about that is you could think about those neighbor tones, or the black notes, the quarter notes, as upper neighbors or lower neighbors. So, for instance, the D above the C is a whole step upper neighbor, which is another powerful thing in music. When you're doing neighbors around the tone that you want to land on, or a chord tone, half step underneath for a leading tone, whole step above. So the diminished scale has both, because when you're going C, D, D is a whole step above the C, but it's also a half step below the E flat. So a little theory lesson to introduce the diminished scale before we get to the pattern. This is a really cool scale, and it's very, very, very common in especially bebop language. So first things first, if you don't know the chords and the scales, very, very good to just practice it up and down the horn. I only have it written in one octave, but of course practice it as many octaves as you can. And once you get the hang of that chord and also the scale, and you're thinking about the four different names that it could possibly have, you can play pattern number one, which is just sort of going up the scale in a certain weavy kind of way. So that actually, I just played the first one. It's a concert C diminished, so I played D diminished on my tenor. If you guys are familiar with the recording Eternal Triangle by Sonny Stitt, when Sonny Stitt plays his solo over rhythm changes, he plays just that sort of pattern, starting on his A, playing the C diminished scale, or the A diminished. So he used that exact pattern in a solo. If you're not familiar with that, it's one of the best solos in all of rhythm changes playing that I've come across. One of my favorites. Then pattern two, when you've got comfortable with that, is exploring the neighbor tones more in depth. And that is, we're going to ascend the diminished scale using the upper neighbor. So the first example, which is C diminished, I'll play D diminished on the tenor. I only have it written in one octave on the sheet, but of course because I want to learn it all over my instrument, I went up the next octave as well. So bar number 1 there is just the upper neighbors, where I'm coming down to the C with the D and coming down to the E flat and coming down to the F sharp with the neighbors above it. And I'm thinking of this, of course, the entire time as this is the C diminished scale that I'm playing. On the way down, you can play the lower neighbors, those little half steps. So that would sound like this. This is a really fun lick to play, and I think I first saw this in a Charlie Parker solo where he just whipped it out really, really fast. It was almost like an understated thing. And so the key centers there that I just played were concert B flat, G, E, and C sharp, and I played the half steps underneath all of those key centers or chord tones as I went down. So those two alone are really great to practice, and I like to kind of practice them together. So starting on my D, I'm going to go, or start approaching the D from my E. So playing the first line there, pattern number 2. So I'm going up and I'm going down that way, and it's a really great way to get up and down the diminished scale without playing just the straight up scale. Page 2, I have another pattern which is combining both of these neighbor tones, where I do the upper neighbor and then I go to the lower neighbor and then I land on the chord tone that I'm trying to get to. So the first example is C diminished, and it basically, you could also think of it like you're encircling the chord tone that you're trying to land on. You can do this with major scales too, of course. Like for instance, if you were going to do it in C major, sounds really cool, but this time we're doing it with the diminished scale. So that sounds like this. Of course, I played it just as written on the sheet. Take it up an octave and go as far as you can go, and make sure to play all 3. And also, again, start in different places, because these lines are actually counting as 4 different possible diminished chords. The last bit on page number 2 is just some examples of how you can use this scale / chord in real-life examples, so to speak. And that is over a dominant chord. It's one of the most common places you're going to be able to use a diminished chord or scale. If you build a diminished chord off of the 3rd note of a dominant chord, so let's use G7 for example. If you build a diminished chord off of the B, which is the 3rd, you'll have B, D, F, A flat, and that actually is the same thing as a G7 flat 9 chord. So it works perfectly, and it's almost like every dominant chord you've ever played had a little diminished chord nestled in there. So that's why it works, and it's not even as much a substitution, it's just another way of thinking about it. So I also really like that way of thinking about it too, because I'm already thinking about the 3rd of the chords that I'm playing. For instance, if I get to a G7, I'm going to immediately think B, because that's a really good note to think about. It's one of the guide tones, important tones. So if I just build a diminished from there, or think about the diminished scale from that point, I've already arrived without having to do any kind of extra thinking. So I just have several examples of a way that you could resolve a G7 to a C major using a diminished scale. So I'm going to play them on the tenor transposed to A7 to D major, but the sheet is written G7 to C, so I'm considering that concert. The first one is just like this. So when I'm playing my F sharp or the concert C, I'm thinking of that as the 3rd of the C major 7 that we've resolved to. If I had a piano player to play with me, you'd hear that more clearly. The next one, you just start in a different place. Or you can arpeggiate up the diminished chord and then come back down. Or this next one is actually the same exact thing, except for I displaced the first note up an octave, so I changed the shape of it. The next one is a really cool bebop line that you could try with a triplet. And then finally, another favorite because of the way that it uses a triplet and uses also the diminished scale. So those are 6 really great examples of a way that you can resolve to a major chord from a dominant chord using the diminished scale, and within mostly a bebop language. So practice those in all 12 keys. I didn't hit transpose to all 12 keys on my program, but if you do that in your head, that would be extremely good. And if you need to, you can write it out as well. So that's sort of a crash course in the diminished scale and some of the licks and patterns that you can practice. In the future, I'm going to have some more diminished patterns that I really like to practice, but I thought I would start out with just a brief explanation and some places for you guys to start. So I hope there's something in there for everybody and that you enjoy. And stay tuned for Friday's finish line. It's going to be a doozy, and I can't wait to hear your guys' responses to it. Subscribe to the YouTube channel and leave any comments for suggestions, tips, or ideas. And I will see you on Friday. Thanks.